Meanwhile, as we mentioned to you earlier on in the bulletin, the US-sponsored resolution on Sri Lanka was adopted at the UN Human Rights Council session in Geneva. Incidentally, India voted in favor of the resolution.
The results of the recorded votes are as follows: 25 in favor, 13 against, 8 abstentions. Draft proposal L.1/revision 1 is therefore adopted.
25 nations including USA, India, Benin, Ivory Coast, Libya, Sierra Leone, South Korea, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Peru, Austria, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Czech Republic, Estonia, Montenegro, Poland, Moldova and Romania voted in favor of the resolution. Meanwhile, 13 UNHRC members including Congo, Mauritania, Uganda, Indonesia, Kuwait, Maldives, Pakistan, Philippines, Qatar, Thailand, UAE, Ecuador and Venezuela voted against the US-sponsored resolution. Countries including Japan, Malaysia, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Angola, Botswana, Burkina Faso and Ethiopia abstained from voting.
The United States is pleased to present for adoption draft resolution promoting reconciliation and accountability in Sri Lanka. We thank the 41 co-sponsors of this text. Through this resolution, we encourage the government of Sri Lanka to implement the constructive recommendations of the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission and the recommendations in the High Commissioner's report, to take additional measures to fulfill its obligations and commitments on accountability and reconciliation, and to address concerns on issues of the rule of law and human rights in Sri Lanka today.
We observe that the parameters of Resolution 19/2 have been completely shifted with the introduction of substantive elements of the OHCHR report and are specifically of concern, given the fact that Sri Lanka is being, in effect, requested to implement the recommendations of the OHCHR report with no regard to the domestic reconciliation process which is ongoing in Sri Lanka. The situation in Sri Lanka does not warrant such urgent attention. Therefore, the disproportionate attention that is being paid to Sri Lanka in this Council is not commensurate with the actual situation on the ground and does not set a healthy precedent for the work of this Council. Throughout the 30 years that Sri Lanka has faced terrorism sponsored from abroad and funded from abroad, it has maintained its democratic institutions and has remained true to its democratic traditions. A country like Sri Lanka needs to be helped, not criticized and chastised. For these reasons, Mr. President, my delegation calls for a vote on this resolution.
We note with concern the inadequate progress by Sri Lanka in fulfilling its commitments to this Council in 2009. Further, we call on Sri Lanka to move forward on its public commitments, including on the devolution of political authority through full implementation of the 13th Amendment and building upon it. We reiterate our call for an independent and credible investigation into allegations of human rights violations and loss of civilian lives. We urge Sri Lanka to take forward measures to ensure accountability. We expect these measures to be to the satisfaction of the international community.
Given the very limited progress of the last year, the European Union believes that the current human rights situation in Sri Lanka and accountability and reconciliation should remain on the agenda of this Council. The impartial application of the rule of law is crucial to progress in these areas, and it is essential to safeguard the independence of the judiciary.
Venezuela rejects, inasmuch as they are unjustified and unnecessary, the interventionist attempts to meddle in the affairs of a country which is working towards its national reconciliation. We believe that this resolution does not have any foundation on genuine dialogue or cooperation, which are the cornerstones of the work of this Council. We believe that this is a condemning resolution which does not take into account the efforts made by Sri Lanka to bring about reconciliation. We take this opportunity to reaffirm our position against this draft resolution motivated by a serious political bias which does not correspond to the facts and does not comply with the idea of universality, impartiality and non-selectivity that should always be supreme in the mandate of this Council.
Japan encourages Sri Lanka to make the utmost efforts to continue to cooperate with the international community. Japan also strongly urges Sri Lanka to steadily implement, with a concrete timeline, effective measures to address various challenges, including the realization of its commitments made during the recent Japan-Sri Lanka summit meeting, in order to achieve improvement of its human rights situations and national reconciliation, including on the issue of accountability in a prompt manner. Japan will abstain from the vote on this resolution.
The resolution before us today is clearly unacceptable to Sri Lanka. Firstly, the preambular part of the text, we believe, is highly intrusive, is replete with misrepresentations, and in its overall scope accentuates the negative and eliminates or is dismissive of the positive. It also casts aspersions upon domestic processes that are ongoing without any foundation. We are addressing the substance of the text and are not merely seeking to point out double standards adopted by some proponents. Mr. President, the reference to the POE report in the Council, which was not sanctioned by an intergovernmental process, sets a dangerous precedent which can be manipulated by those with vested interests to introduce unsubstantiated reports against any member state of this Council or observer state. Why is this inordinate and disproportionate level of interest in a country that has successfully ended a 30-year conflict against terrorism and has demonstrated so much progress in a relatively short space of time? Mr. President, today it is Sri Lanka, tomorrow it may be any other country in this Council which does not adhere to the political objectives of some who profess to promote and protect human rights the world over, but pursue agendas other than human rights.
What we saw today in Geneva was a broad spectrum of international concern about the lack of progress on reconciliation and accountability in Sri Lanka. So we saw the U.S. and 40 additional co-sponsors put forward this resolution. We saw the majority of members of the Human Rights Council vote yes on the resolution. So this resolution encourages the government of Sri Lanka to take action on what it has undertaken already in the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission plan recommendations, what it has already obligated itself to following up on to the Sri Lankan people.
It's time now for the newspaper cartoon of the day.
A discussion organized on the topic towards a coherent and credible foreign policy was held in Colombo yesterday. These were the views that were expressed at this discussion.
The axial relationship that Sri Lanka has with the external world is that with India. This does not mean that Sri Lanka has to be a satellite of India. What this means is that Sri Lanka has to understand that the permanent tendency towards hostility towards Sri Lanka, which is a fluctuating tendency in Tamil Nadu, can and will have an impact on Delhi and can therefore tilt India from being a buffer, which it was during the last war, to being on the fence, and then beyond that, perhaps, to moving towards the situation that we had in the 1980s of an adversarial stance. Now, how can the extremists in Tamil Nadu be dealt with? They can only be dealt with by the use of the well-known doctrine of the balance of power, which means helping the moderates in Tamil Nadu balance off the extremists and helping Delhi balance off Chennai or Tamil Nadu.
I believe very firmly that if the international, so-called international community, and now I'm speaking about the US and its allies, are so interested in Sri Lanka, it has nothing to do with the Sri Lankan people, nor our interests, nor human rights. So we've got to get that straight. They are not out there moving a resolution because they believe that the interests and the rights of the people, Tamils or Sinhalese or Muslims, are at stake. They are out there because, one, they have a strategic interest in this region. We are on a very strategic maritime corridor that links east-west and west-to-east, and at the same time, we are being used in and much for a different purpose, which is to in the design of this new architecture that I would like to also describe. What is it that the US and the West think is wrong in the system? They think that the United Nations, multilateralism, a system based on sovereign equality between states is out of date. Because, and the bigger the crisis, the more important it is for them to find legitimization to recolonize. They have to intervene again in the former colonies in order to gain control of the wealth and resources that are concentrated there.
Well, I see, if you look at the current situation, I see that we have Sri Lanka has more enemies than friends. So this is the truth at the moment. So this is a very unfortunate situation. Why did it arise? So we have to look back, and if you look at what is happening in South India at the moment, where our people are harassed, then also what is happening in Geneva. I hope at the end of the day that we can settle everything, but what is important here is that we ought to take a professional approach. And I still see that this professional approach is lacking.